Good afternoon, everybody. And welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History. I'm your MC, Valanda Calloway. I want to ask you to look at the back of your programs because that is where you'll find a full list of the sponsors. And I need to say thank you to them because this event is free to you, but it is not a free event to put on. It costs a lot of money to do this. So I want to take a moment and say thank you to the sponsors. The African American Commission, Raleigh Arts Commission, UNC Rex Health, PNC, Wake Med, AARP, North Carolina Black Alliance, Publix, Southern First Bank, Curie, Chiesi, Advanced Community Health, Bridgestone Tires, United Therapeutics, Ruffey Homes, North Carolina A&T, M&F Bank, my bank, Oasis Health and Wellness, Wake Tech Community College, National Black Coalition of Federal Aviation Employees, Smithfield's Chicken and Barbecue, and the Triangle Tribune. Also, thank you to the event planning committee members. People wearing a name tag with a green ribbon represent these sponsors, so if you see them, please be sure to thank them. Thank you to our volunteers. We have representatives from UNC Rex Healthcare here. We have Duke Energy, Top Teens, North Carolina State, UNCG, my alumni chapter, the Raleigh Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Wake Tech, and not to mention our very own North Carolina Museum of History and many other people from across the Triangle. This event is a true community event and you all represent the best parts of our community. Help us work to improve our programs. You can talk to the Delta volunteers and fill out event evaluations and return them to the information desk in the lobby. These evaluations help us get funding as well as plan and improve the events offered here at the museum. If you want programs like this to continue, join the museum, and as a member, you receive the museum's magazine, program calendar, and a 10% discount in the museum shop. And if you haven't been to the museum shop, there's some good stuff in there. I went in there one day for one thing and came out with $80 worth of stuff. So be careful when you go in there because there's some good stuff in there. And you get discounted fees on programs, special exhibits, invitations to special receptions, and other members-only events. And today only, visitors to the museum get half price on membership. So stop at the associates table or in the museum gift shop in the lobby to sign up today. If you can't commit for a whole year, give what you can in the donation box in the lobby. And all money collected in that box will go directly to supporting this event for next year. Every dollar counts, so we appreciate you. Like us on Facebook, friend the museum and the AACC page, follow us on Twitter, and sign up for the free program calendar at Get Connected to the Museum. Support Black authors. If you like what you hear, be sure to support them. Get their books, get her book, get the authors who were just in here. They're outside selling their books as well. And now I would like to introduce you to Miss Carmen Hoffman. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Hoffman. I've been practicing. I still have it.
I messed it up and okay.
Carmen learned the value of history and family legacy growing up as a child. A Black native of Raleigh, she has always recognized that only some of the stories have been told. While writing the journal for the North Carolina House of Representatives, she realized that truth is many-sided and that what is generally shared is only what is comfortable to hear. Her work as a family historian, racial equity advocate, and truth teller is helping to raise awareness of the roots of erasure in the Black community's history. Can't wait to hear from you, Carmen. Take it away.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not used to doing the mic thing. Thank you so much for coming out and hearing. There are a couple more chairs up here, I see, if you all want to fill in so you don't have to stand. And I'll get started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Raleigh's historically Black communities, past and present. I have to start and tell you my story. I'm a Raleigh native, was born at St. Agnes Hospital and came home to Washington Terrace. I graduated from Broughton High School and North Carolina State University, and I worked at the North Carolina House of Representatives from 1981 to 2011. I start with this first, I don't know if this will do anything other than click. So the Overland Road is where my parents lived when they first got married. When they got married in 1958, there were very few apartments for people to live in. You either owned your own home or you had to rent a room from somewhere. And so they rented a room from the McClendons on Overland Road. That house is now an apartment complex. Actually, it's been an apartment complex for about 4 years and has changed hands already and changed names. When I came home to Washington Terrace down on the bottom. Then we moved to Southeast Street, which was a duplex at the time. It has now been purchased and turned into a single family home. We moved to Durham. My father had a drugstore in Durham, Garrett Parker Drug, that was in Hayti on Fayetteville Street. And of course, after a couple of years of him owning that, it was destroyed by urban renewal, and the highway was built. We moved back to Raleigh. He had a drugstore here in Raleigh. My mother was a teacher, and we moved to Sandia Drive, which is off of Ridge Road. And it was a white neighborhood. We moved there in 1969, and I couldn't understand why we were moving to a white neighborhood, except I knew that my mother was very much a social activist. So I asked her, why did we move there? And she said, for us to get the kind of house we wanted in Southeast Raleigh, we would have to buy 2 lots. Well, I was 10, that didn't mean anything to me, and I really didn't understand the reasoning for that until I did the research for this book. When my parents retired, they moved to a condo over by Rex Hospital, and my first home was on my own, was on Daniel Street in the Cameron Village neighborhood. When I got married, I moved to Carver Street, which is off of New Bern Avenue. Then I moved to Overland and lived there for 31 years. And I am now living in Battery Heights, which is another neighborhood. Overland is a neighborhood that is in the book. And Battery Heights is also a neighborhood in the book. It is a post-World War II National Historic Registered neighborhood. And then we have 3 of those in Raleigh. Battery Heights, Rochester Heights, and Madonna Acres. So this is what I just told you. I didn't find the answer to my question until I started researching the book. So I want to talk to you a little bit about where our housing comes from. So the housing that was during slavery was different. Obviously, it was different. So this is the Stackville Plantation in Durham, the 2 bottom pictures. The picture on the left is a house that was for the enslaved people. They had several of those. And the reason I'm talking about Stackville is because the Cameron family Stackville was the largest plantation east of the Mississippi. They had over 1,000 slaves. They also had slave plantations outside of Atlanta and in Louisiana. They had their area stretched over into Wake County. So the Camerons had a huge impact on what life was like in Durham and Wake County. So this slave quarters had room for 4 families. Each family had a room, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. And if you don't know that Stackville is in Durham, it's outside on Highway 85, you should go and visit and be sure that, and they're trying to do more to tell the story of the plantation from the point of view of the oppressed people as opposed to the point of view of the white people who owned it. The White House on the bottom is the house of the owners, the Camerons. And the house on top, if you don't recognize that and you live in Raleigh, that's what we call in Raleigh Mordecai House. We don't call it Mordecai Plantation, but that's what it was. The city's boundaries were established in 1792. We had east, west, north, and south streets. If you drive around today and you cross those streets, that's how small Raleigh was when it was started. Raleigh was crisscrossed by creeks and watersheds, so there was going to be a lot of water flooding and that kind of thing in Raleigh. After the Civil War, the formerly enslaved people came to Raleigh from all across the state. People came, there's one account in the former slave narratives that people came just like they were. If they had a shirt on and shoes, that's how they came. If they didn't have a shirt, they just had on pants, that's how they came. And they just came because they were free. Nobody told them what to do, how to act, how to be. So they just came because they were free. They didn't know what it was like. So this map here is the population of Raleigh, I believe in 1960. The crosshatched areas are where black people live. Because of poverty, the land that white people wanted to live in was where there were high hills. They didn't want to live where it was going to be wet, where it was going to be, mildew and moldy. They didn't want to be where it was going to flood. So the land that was rented or sold to blacks was the less expensive land. It was usually in the creek bottoms or less desirable locations. And a lot of, after slavery ended, so much money from the plantations had gone back to the war, but a lot of the plantation owners didn't have money. So when they died, their estates would just be sold. Sometimes they were sold for taxes because there was such a dearth of taxes paid during the war. So the residential patterns were that blacks were interspersed throughout the city with whites originally. But as white people began to be able to move out, they did. These areas that I talked about are called freedmen's villages. And Oberlin was not a freedmen's village. Oberlin was a free person village. It was started by free blacks. It was started in 1858. Jesse Pettiford, who bought the first land in Oberlin, worked. He had come here from Virginia. He was free. He worked for the Camerons, and they sold him some land. And then other people started to buy land in the Oberlin community. Oberlin was a very desirable community because it was up on top of a hill. It didn't flood. That was not an issue for them. And the freedmen's villages were kind of clustered around the city. So if you ever go to the city cemetery, that was a boundary. So that's why the cemetery sits there. It was because it was outside the city limits, and you didn't have to smell the smells of rotten bodies. So in areas where there was economic advancement, black leaders and middle class grew. Raleigh is fortunate to have had Shaw and St. Augustine's started right after the Civil War ended. Because our black middle class grew up in between those schools. And particularly when we consider Shaw University had a pharmacy school, a medical school, the first 4-year medical school in the country. They had a seminary that they taught women and men. And they had a law school and a dental school. They had all of those until 1918 when the last professional school closed. So by the 1890s, 50% of Raleigh's population was black, and it was fairly mature. The neighborhoods were becoming more segregated. As I said, even if they started mixed, as white people were able to afford to move out, they did. They would either lease or rent their property. Sometimes they would sell it, but they could move where they wanted to go. And where they generally wanted to go was where other people who looked like them went. Black people could not move. So where the freedmen's villages were, those just became settled neighborhoods. Because there was one article, actually it was a letter that a woman wrote to her brother. She talked about this unbleached mass of people who were taking over Raleigh. She was talking about black people. They didn't have any control over them anymore. So the way white people decided to start controlling was to annex these areas that were outside of the city. Then they could police them. Some of the institutions there were black churches, there were non-black churches by the 1880s. There were schools. There was a second and fourth ward. Those were predominantly white, and then it became the third and fourth, black. And then the third and fourth ward became predominantly black. There were several graded schools, the Masonic Hall, the colleges, and the Institute for the Colored, Deaf, Dumb, and Blind. That was in South Raleigh. But the goal, as I said, was to keep Negroes or blacks. And I tell you, I use all of them interchangeably because as I was researching, all of these things were used interchangeably. And actually, that's how I grew up. Was, you know, it took us a long time to get our grandmother to stop calling people colored. But, you know, we grew up with every name: colored, Negro, black, African American. You know, it's hard to know who you are sometimes if people keep changing what you're called. So I think I've talked about most of this. So white people generally chose to live along the ridges and on top of the hills. One of the things that I read was the low-lying areas were near contaminated streams, slaughterhouses, flour mills, industrial sites, or close to the cemeteries. And often the areas that black people lived in were in the alleys. So if you go through old city directories and you look where someone lives, it might have an address and then say R. That means the rear of that building. And sometimes that meant they had a shanty or just a little shed attached to the back of a building. That was particularly places where, you know, it was someone who worked for a white family that wanted them on site and available to them all the time. And they could just call them and they would be right there. But these alleys were not sanitary. That's where the waste was thrown. So this one book said they were considered filthy, narrow places with open sewers, breeding ground of disease and crime, and areas only fit for cattle. So there were high mortality rates because obviously you get sick. There was a lot of tuberculosis. There was a lot of death. So it was a high mortality rate. And then controlling black populations, that was the annexation of areas, and they would be annexed because of unsanitary conditions or lawlessness. And unsanitary conditions, they could have cleaned those up, but they didn't. They didn't after they annexed them. That was just a reason. This is the black and white housing pattern map from 1886. So you'll see crosses, some are black, some are white, that are churches, the little school buildings, and the black streets are where black people were living. 1890s, half of Raleigh's population was black. We had elected officials or appointed officials. The third and fourth ward were black, which was southeast and southwest Raleigh. But as the Jim Crow laws started back up, those things were taken away. Even governing, you know, there were people who were on the city council or city aldermen, as they were called sometimes. They were actually, Stuart Ellison was removed from office because he was a postmaster, and they considered that to be, I guess, like double dipping. So he was at a meeting, wasn't told that the motion was going to come up for him to be removed from his seat. And he was removed, and he went to court about it, but still lost. A lot of information, if you ever just are interested in Raleigh, there's a book called The Urban Negro in the South by Dr. Wilma Carter. She was a professor at Shaw University. This book is still used in research quite a bit. The only place I know you can get it is it's still on Amazon. It's called a company called Forever Books. It was written in 1961. If you are a native of Raleigh, you could probably read this book and you could tell who she talked to. And it caused a lot of consternation because people could recognize when she would talk to somebody or when she would write something down, who they were talking about. There were several names of prominent families that, you know, they had certain occupations and that kind of thing, so that would tell where it was. So these are the settlements that were the freedmen's villages that were settled. So as I said, Oberlin was a three-person village. Lincolnville, which I'll show on the map in a few minutes. Brooklyn, which was near Deborah Farm and St. Augustine's, is now a white community. And if you didn't know that it started out as a freedmen's village, you have no concept. Masonville became the area called Method. And then Hungry Neck, if you'll look on the map, you'll see Hungry Neck on the map. It is on coming down Edenton Street and Newbern. It's on the opposite side of Newbern Avenue from the cemetery. Idlewild is on the opposite side from the Cotton Place area. St. Petersburg is over where, if you're familiar with where Winters Haven used to be, I believe it's called Capitol Flats now. Winters Haven was a home for the elderly that was purchased probably about 5 years ago. And the very same apartments that were subsidized for elderly are now $1,200 and $1,300 a month. Exact same footprint and everything. Old Fairgrounds, the original Fairgrounds is where the old DMV building used to be. The Smith-Haywood neighborhood. As you can see, look at those. This is a hand-drawn map by Carl Larson in his master's thesis. But look at the different size of the areas, the lands. You can see Smith-Haywood was closer to where Shaw University was. The lots were bigger. Idlewild was closer to St. Aug. The lots were bigger. As you come back into the middle of town, the lots get smaller. Lincolnville neighborhood was actually situated out where the parking lot there are a couple of seats up here at the front. Lincolnville was situated where the parking lot for Carter Finley Stadium is today. The state required, and I don't know if eminent domain was what it was called at the time, but the state required them to sell their land, and they sold it for $1. And the neighborhood and the church had to move. Their cemetery didn't move. Eventually their cemetery was moved and they moved to Nowell Road. Today the church is on Highway 54 headed to Cary. So I just wanted you to know where that is. The original church building, if you go to the state fair, there is a church in the village of yesteryear. That was their original church, and they actually bought it from Ephesus Baptist Church, which was a white church on Western Boulevard as well. The Method neighborhood. You're fine. The Method neighborhood is about half the size that it was. Method originally stretched across Western Boulevard and went down to Avon Ferry Road, but that land had to be sold off. That was family farms. Oberlin Village was huge. Oberlin Village went from Hillsborough Street to Glenwood Avenue. Oberlin was cut in half by urban renewal when Wade Avenue was built. And a lot of black neighborhoods in Raleigh, a lot of black neighborhoods across the country were torn apart by urban renewal, which was federal funds that they began to plan for in the 40s. And eventually, they would come through and cut out what they call blighted neighborhoods. So, you know, blight, if you can't do any better, if that's the best you have, and nobody's willing to help, then yes, that's what you're going to get is blight. If what was built after the Civil War was housing, the real estate investors would buy the land and divide the land for the formerly enslaved people into maybe a 1/12 of an acre for a little tiny rental house. A lot of times we think about shotgun houses. That wasn't the only kind of house that there was that was built. But consider if the land in southeast Raleigh was on a 1/12 of an acre, and the land in Oakwood and over to the north was a 1/5 of an acre, and we build our generational wealth in America on homes, on passing our homes down. You just came out of slavery. You really didn't have a lot of money. And you were denied within 20 or 30 years even being educated well. And then for generational wealth, you get a 1/12 of an acre as opposed to a half or a whole acre on your home that you have to pass it down, and your property values are considered lower because of where they're located. It's hard to see how we would ever catch up. So Oberlin was cut into right there and eventually bought out. What Dr. Carter, when she interviewed one gentleman, he said that the reason that Oberlin land was sold so much was because white people wanted to live up high, and Oberlin was the highest point. And people were used to selling land for $4,000 or $5,000. White people began to offer $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for the lots. So yeah, you would sell, and literally that's still what's happening in Oberlin today and other communities, and that's why we see so much gentrification. These are some of the other neighborhoods. Many of you won't even recognize this because this is the area across from the Red Hat Amphitheater. These were homes, these were churches, these were businesses. When I was growing up, all of these neighborhoods were still intact. Urban renewal came in and tore that up in the late 60s and early 70s. Nazareth is another neighborhood that was black. It is right behind where the Catholic Diocese is today. By 1910, Idlewild was completely black, even though it was designed originally to be a white community. They were only able to sell the land that was on New Bern Avenue. The land further back into Idlewild didn't sell because it was going downhill and there was a creek back there. So they began to sell that land to black families. Smoky Hollow, which had been a mixed community of mill workers and people who worked for the railroad, and those were actually really good jobs because you didn't have to be well educated to use them. However, as the use of coal in the train industry went away, they got rid of using black people in the railroad industry, except for porters. So Smoky Hollow was destroyed by urban renewal. It's built back up now, and there aren't very many of us living there. On maps, Negro housing was listed as shanties or tenements. This is just some other housing, and one of the things that really stuck out to me as I was researching was my memory of these houses being built on stilts, brick stilts. Well, if you consider that they were downhill, as it rained, water was going to run downhill. If your house wasn't up on stilts, it was going to get wet. Your floors would be damp. And yes, these look blighted, but this is what our people had to live in, and we're still living in some instances in the 50s and 60s. This is what Smoky Hollow looked for before it was cleaned up. The 4th Ward in Raleigh, that is down across from where Mamonde Hall, I still call it Memorial Auditorium, but that area back in there that when you drive through there now, you see nothing but, you know, empty land, or the MLK Boulevard goes through there and cut out, you know, that was part of the rationale for cutting that out. Nothing was rebuilt there as was promised. This is an old heat map from 2000, but this shows you the racial density and how the neighborhoods are set up. So the blue dots are black people, and the red dots are white people, and the green is Asian, I believe, and the yellow is Hispanic. And then this is just a bibliography of where I took quite a bit of the information that I got. The book has maps in it, not these maps. It has other maps to show you the original plats and how the land was divided. There are pictures that I have found in my family when I moved back to my aunt and uncle's house, and found pictures in there that nobody had ever seen before because they were covered up. There's all kinds of interesting information in the book, and I'm not going to do a reading, but I would love for you to get a copy. The museum is selling them, I am selling them, and I'll be happy to sign them for you. As you can see, I will come and talk and do all of that kind of thing. So I got to put my little plugs in there too. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Before you go, we have some questions. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful. I learned a lot. I didn't know you before. My question is when you were living off of Ridge Road, which is named Ridge because it's a ridge, you were living on Sandia. Did you attend Lacey Elementary? Were you able to do that?
I went to Lacey Elementary. The first day, I started there April of 1969. There were 4 black children at the school. I walked and caught hell. The other 3 children were the grandchildren of the janitor, and he brought them back and forth every day. Yes, I was at Lacey, and it was an interesting experience for me to be a black child in all of that sea of white, and I have not necessarily always wanted to be a people pleaser, but I like people, so I had to figure out ways to make friends. And that could be difficult. The first day I went to school, there were 4 very nice white girls who sat around me. And the second day I went to school, there were 4 empty chairs. So I had a lot of experiences that I didn't share with my parents, that I didn't share with anybody because, you know, I was young and I didn't know what I know now.
Thank you for your question. Are there other questions?
We moved into Biltmore Hills in the year I was born, 1963. Do you know about that development of Biltmore Hills?
Biltmore Hills was, they're still researching. In fact, there's a study on civil rights monuments in Biltmore Hills, an architectural study being done by the Raleigh Historic Districts Commission. And it was built originally, it started in like the 60s, the early 60s, 61, I think. Evidently, there were only 4 floor plans for the homes there, but the size of the lots were very good size. There's flooding still in Biltmore Hills and Rochester Heights because they sit in the Walnut Creek watershed, and Walnut Creek gets its water starting in the Fenton development in Cary. So whatever goes into the water there travels downstream. One of the reasons I actually got into this research was because when the plans were coming forward for downtown South, I recognized that something sitting that size on Walnut Creek was going to cause more development issues downstream, and that wasn't really a concern for the developer. So we were fortunate to be able to work with Partners for Environmental Justice and St. Ambrose Church and eventually get a Walnut Creek watershed fund that K Development has to put money into as they build it to help mitigate downstream and also to encourage them to do as much green infrastructure as possible to help keep Rochester Heights from continuing to flood as much as it does.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm just interested to know, is there a movement for African Americans to move back into those historic neighborhoods and to reclaim those neighborhoods?
I don't know that there is a movement because I don't know who has the money that can afford to do that. I cannot. I left Oberlin. We bought our house for $65,000 in 1991. That was the tax value. The gentleman who owned it at the time was white, and we actually bought it in 2000. We moved there in 1991, and had been renting from the same man. He had purchased it from the sister of the gentleman who worked for him because she was an elder and she needed to move into Glenwood Towers. Of course, she couldn't have any property to do that. When I moved out last year, the tax value on my house had gone from $65,000 to $319,000. The house beside me was sold with the footings not poured several years before that for $600,000. Most of the houses that are now being built in Oberlin are $800,000 or $900,000 to over $1 million. And so it is hard for our people because I could not afford to buy my house today. And I'm a retired state employee and I made pretty good money when I worked in the legislature. I couldn't afford to buy the house today. I couldn't afford to make the house payment. I just barely can afford to pay rent where I live. And it's because so much of our affordable housing has been torn down and rebuilt with housing that we can't afford because we are a popular area. But I was reading, and I posted on my Facebook page the other day, an article that I found from 1949 talking about the need, how the head of housing in Raleigh, he said that we were pushing poor people and Negroes out of their areas of housing. The article that he wrote, I thought could have been written today. And that's a sad thing. And we have to be involved in rezoning. We have to be involved if we can pull together a trust and purchase land that we see is sitting vacant, or there's a house that is not being taken care of. We have to do that, and we have to come together to do it. We can't expect somebody to come and save us. Nobody has saved us but us thus far.
Carmen, this was amazing. I could listen to this for hours, but we have to go. So everyone, Carmen will be outside at her booth. Outside, happy to talk with you outside and sign books outside as well. Thank you all. We have a spoken word performance coming up, so you are welcome to come back in just a few moments and enjoy hearing from Melissa Ray Thompson.
That's the baby cousin.
It's water.
I want to read the books because I have gone to that many places. Did you like that many places? It's there to a secret of all the people that are always, I didn't even talk about people.
This was great. I could I'm glad you came out. spoken word artist is solo, so I don't know that she needs full tape. But oh, there are layers. So yeah, I guess we should leave it. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
I know I invited like everybody. Okay, I think people will be tripping in. Yeah, let's wait. Let's give it. Yeah. Yeah, perfect.